Hey, welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I am the Fat Guy. Most people call me Brett. Thank you so much for listening today. Before we get into why you're overweight and whose fault is it really, which will surprise most people, but if you're somebody that's been down on yourself or down on others, this will be enlightening for you. So stick around for that. I must tell you, I'm not a doctor and I have no formal medical training. While I have researched diet, nutrition, and health hundreds of hours over the past 5 years or so, I really am not a medical professional. Before you begin any kind of diet or health program, you should always consult with a doctor. Nothing I give here is meant to be medical advice or specific weight loss advice to you. This is all my opinions or things I share about my own personal journey. So with that being said, let's jump right into it, shall we? I put up with this my whole life. If you're overweight, especially if you've been overweight since childhood like I have, you've been called every name in the book. Some of them hurt more than others. Some of them didn't bother me at all. I've been called names that didn't bother me at all. I genuinely would laugh at them and they were funny. But I've been called names like lazy, gluttonous, no willpower. Things that hurt me a lot because I knew they weren't true. Like, I honestly, I don't know many people in life that have more willpower than me. Literally everything I've ever set my mind to do and I've accomplished it exceedingly well. I'm a person who puts my nose to the grindstone. I'll work 20 hours a day. About 10 years ago, I started an online business. I put my nose to the grindstone. I would work my regular job in radio, and then I would come home and work, another 10 hours on my online business. And then when I left radio, I literally was working 16 to 20 hours a day on this online business, building it up. And I did that for several years, many, many years, until I built it up to a very successful online business that I sold for tens of thousands of dollars. And, it's just one example, but, that's been me my whole life. I'm just a go-getter. So I'm not a person who doesn't have willpower, and I always knew this. And I tried to lose weight, and it was very frustrating. So the problem with weight loss is metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, and that's something we know now for sure. And, some people are genetically gifted. They have super sensitivity to insulin, so their body handles sugar really, really well. They're not very good at storing fat. They're excellent at handling sugar. And so really these people, doesn't matter what they eat, they gain little to no weight ever. Then you have people in the middle. They are reasonably insulin sensitive. And they can eat too much, handle it okay, and they'll just gain a little weight. And these will be what you'd call average people. They may have some slight love handles. They may have a little slight pudge around the belly or whatever, but they're not fat. As they get older, they will get more fat, and probably by the time they hit 50, they'll be carrying 30 or 40 extra pounds by that time. But they're still not obese. And so while they have slowly gained weight throughout their life, they've never been obese. They've never had the problems I've had and a lot of other people have. And then you have people who just have really poor insulin sensitivity, and they compound the issue and make it worse, and that would be me and most other people. So a lot of it is genetics. You just really, let me take this back. You can take the moderately insulin sensitive people that I just talked about that'll gain a little bit of weight but never get obese, and they can eat really badly and become obese. They are the people that can kind of control things based on what they eat. And I may have been that person, I don't know. I believe, due to family history and from what I know and how I was raised, because I didn't eat a ton of junk and sweets because we couldn't afford it. My mom and dad grew greens. Well, we all did. We always had a greens garden, and we lived off of a lot of greens, which doesn't cause obesity and isn't a problem with insulin. And then meat. The one thing I would say that we did eat a lot of was bread, and I don't know that bread didn't ruin it for me, because bread was cheap. You didn't even have to have milk to make it. You could just make it with water. And so my mom would buy flour, which was cheap. She would come up with lard or other things that were cheap, and just make the hoe cakes. We ate a lot of hoe cakes. If you don't know what hoe cake is, then you ain't ever been poor. But then when she'd make biscuits too. And I remember my dad as a kid. My dad would eat an entire baker of biscuits. If you don't know what a baker of biscuits is, again, you're probably young or you've never been poor. But a baker of biscuits, it's a round pan. It's a biscuit pan. And, there may be 8 to 10 biscuits in there. My dad would literally eat a whole baker of them at some point. And I'd eat 3 or 4 or 5 of them. But that's all we had. Like, other than the bread, we didn't have much on the table because we were poor. It was some greens. And then we'd have very small pieces of meat. My mom would buy a ham. My mom would wait until hams went on sale. And she'd save her money and save her money and save her money. And she'd go buy like 4 or 5 hams. And we literally lived off a ham. Now, ham has sugar in it. And it can have quite a bit of sugar in it. So there is sugar in ham. And then we just didn't eat much of it. She would ration it out so that it would last. And so there wasn't much meat. I would say the bulk of our meal was bread. The second most thing was greens. And the third thing was ham. Every now and then we'd get fortunate and we would have hamburger steaks. Or we'd get fortunate and we'd have a pork chop. But for the most part, it was ham. And so I think all this led to it. And then as we got into my lower teen years, my mom and dad actually did pull themselves out of poverty, and we started having more stuff. And then my mom liked to reward me, and so I ate a lot of French fries and a lot of burgers with buns and a lot of other things. So my point is I don't know if I was the medium insulin sensitive person or if I'm one of the people that genetically was just horrible from the get-go at handling sugar and with my insulin sensitivity. I don't know. But what I do know is that anybody that's from the middle to the worst side of it was doomed in America because, starting in the 70s, once processed food came along, everything changed. And this is evidenced by just a few facts right out. Today we buy, this is true now, actual statistics and numbers. We buy about half as much fresh milk or whole milk, but 5 times more yogurt, and yogurt is full of sugar. I'm comparing today to the 70s. 3 times more ice cream we buy today. 3 times as much ice cream we buy, the average person buys today as they did in the 70s. And we buy 39 times as many dairy-centered desserts. 39 times. So think of all the many different kinds of desserts that are based on dairy. And we're buying 39 times as many as we did in the 70s per person. On the other hand, we're buying half as many eggs as we did in the 70s. But we're buying 33% more breakfast cereals. And twice as many cereal snacks. These would be cereal bars. Now, if I did a video on breakfast cereals a long time ago. If you're eating Frosted Flakes or you're eating Corn Pops or any of these Fruit Loops, or the list goes on and on and on. Those things are literally 90% sugar. When you look at the nutrition label and you look at the weight per serving and then see how much of that weight is sugar, they're 90% sugar. It's just a bowl of sugar. You're taking a bowl of sugar and putting it in a bowl of milk and eating it. And that's what people eat for breakfast now. That's crazy. Half as many eggs now, 1/3 more breakfast cereals, twice as many cereal snacks like bars. The purchase of whole potatoes went down by half, but we now buy 3 times as many potato chips. And then don't even get me started on drinks. Like, I remember in the 70s, I remember being, 7, 8, 9. Once a week, maybe, we would get to stop at a store. It'd be on like a Saturday. My dad would say, let's get what did he call it? Soda cracker. Let's get a soda cracker and a Coke, he'd say. So to him, a soda cracker, I don't know why he called it a soda cracker, but it'd be those little packs of peanut butter crackers. They're orange colored. He'd buy a pack of them and he'd get a Coke. And then I'd get a Coke. And there weren't many things they could afford to buy because we were pretty poor. But the soda crackers, I don't know if I'm wrong or not, but I want to say they were like 25 cents at that time. Or I'd get, everybody from the South knows about this, I'd buy a small pack of peanuts and you'd pour the peanuts in the Coke. That's the only time I got Coke. I didn't get Coke. Got it like once a week, once every 2 weeks. And at that time, it was those little 10-ounce bottles. There was no 16-ounce Coke or 20-ounce Coke. There was a little 8 or 10-ounce bottle is what you'd get. That was a Coke. That's what all the sizes were. There was no larger or smaller. They were all that size. And that's just continued to ramp up through the 80s, through the 90s, and through the 2000s. So sugar consumption has skyrocketed. And as that's happened, they've all told us low fat is got to be low fat, right? Got to be low fat. That's what causes obesity. That's what causes heart disease. Meanwhile, heart disease gets higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. Obesity gets higher and higher and higher and higher. And we're eating less and less fat. Americans eat about 60% less fat now than they did in the 70s. But yet people are to blame, right? You don't have enough personal motivation. You don't have willpower. You're a fat, lazy slob. You're a glutton. None of this is true. The crap that they're putting in grocery stores, 80% of the grocery store is crap, and 20% of the grocery store is actual food. The only actual food in a grocery store is on the outside aisle. So you're looking at the produce section, you're looking at the meat section, and you're looking at the real cheese section. Now, scattered inside the inner aisles, you'll find some real food here and there, spotted. Whole grain, I guess rice may be considered a real food. So if you find that, maybe some beans, but not canned or prepared or anything. I mean, the actual dried beans maybe would fall into that category. I guess pickles would fall into that category. There's just not many things on the inside aisle of the store that are actually food. These are things that the things on the inside aisles of the store are things that have been made in factories using a lot of crazy, expensive, fancy equipment that you and I could never possibly replicate in our homes. I mean, you look at flour, for example. So, 1,000 years ago, if you ate some kind of a grain, it would be the whole actual grain. Like, it wouldn't be ground down, processed, blanched, and all this crap like this flour is. It would be a kernel. It would be a hard kernel, and it's not very good. I mean, you can find some even the whole grains you find today have been stripped down and aren't as high quality as the grains from 1,000 years ago. But you can actually find whole grains, but you're not going to like them. You won't enjoy eating them because flour is what we like. But you can't do that at home. I mean, you can pound grain down a little bit and make something with a consistency similar maybe to cornmeal, but you're never making flour in your house. You just can't do it. None of these things that you're buying on the inner aisles are stuff that butter on the outside aisle. Butter and heavy cream and stuff like that is real food on the outer aisle. Eggs, those type things. So 80% of the grocery store is garbage. It's stuff that they call food that isn't actually food. And only about 20% of the store, the very outer aisles, contain any actual food. And so nobody's eating actual food. And that's why we're fat. Our bodies can't handle it. We can't handle mega doses of sugar our entire life. What eventually happens is we have to crank out more and more insulin to handle the blood sugar levels, more and more insulin to handle and it does. Your blood sugar stays relatively low into your 20s. And then you get into your 30s for most people. Your blood sugar stays but what you don't know is you're cranking out 10 times as much insulin as you used to keep that sugar level low. And then at some point, the pancreas just gives out. Your beta cells die. And you just can't do it anymore. The insulin, it can't do it. Either one or two things. You're pumping out max insulin and it isn't working, and you can't pump out any more insulin, or the beta cells of your pancreas have given up and now they're dying, and the levels of insulin you can actually produce start falling. So while you're still producing insulin, it's falling less, and your body is even less sensitive to it, and then your blood sugars continue to skyrocket, and then they go, oh, you got diabetes. It just happened. Well, no, it didn't. You've been developing diabetes for the past 15 years. your insulin levels got higher and higher and higher every year. Your body had to produce more insulin to keep your blood sugar level down until it just conked out and couldn't do it anymore. And then suddenly they tell you, oh, you're diabetic. Meanwhile, you also have put on 50 pounds because that's what happens, because your insulin stays high all the time. And when you have high levels of insulin is a fat storage hormone. Your body won't burn fat. It just won't burn it. And it's taking all this excess sugar that it doesn't need that you're eating, and it's converting that into fat and storing it on top of the fat you already have stored. And you don't ever burn it. You don't ever use it. So is it your fault? Well, in the sense that you ate the wrong things, it is your fault. But did you know? I didn't know. I remember my whole life I thought fat was the problem. That's what they told us. You got to eat low fat. Well, what's left? Because there's only 3 macros, right? You got fat, you got carbs, you got protein. Well, they want you to eat protein now, right? Because that's bad for you. And you got to keep fat down because that's bad for you. What does that leave? It leaves carbs. So everything you're eating is high carb. How do you eat low fat? High carb. Well, as we know now, high carb is what's killed us all. It's what's caused heart disease, it's caused Alzheimer's, it's caused cancer, it's caused high blood pressure. It's caused all these things. Obesity. It's incredible. So while we do have some level of blame, the real food was always there for us to eat. 20% of the store still contained real food. 80% of the store contained junk, and our government told us that what we needed to eat was the junk, the low-fat stuff. And so they put low-fat on everything. You can get low-fat cookies. You can get low-fat brownie. There's nothing in there you can't get that's low-fat. Meanwhile, it has 80 gazillion tons of sugar in it. But I'm eating low-fat. Doing the best I can. You're lied to. We're all lied to. But if you've listened to this podcast now, the lie is over. And it is 100% your responsibility. People ask me, it seems like the ketogenic diet is so hard. Just let me tell you something. You want to get healthier and lose weight? You ain't got to track macro 1. Now, if you track it and you're diligent about it, you can lose a lot more weight and you can lose it faster. But if you want to start today and be way better off 10 years from now than you are now, be a lot lighter than you are now, just eat the food on the outer aisles. That's all you got to do. You eat the steak, you eat the ground beef. I would warn you against eating too much chicken. God, there's so many chemicals and byproducts and hormones and genetically altered stuff in chicken that it doesn't even resemble what chicken is. Beef is still relatively unharmed. There's a few things, but if you get organic, you're doing fine. And organic grass-fed is best. But look, stick with that. You get your beef, eat that for sure. Get your steaks. You should primarily be eating beef in the form of ground beef and steak. That's your highest level of nutrients is in those foods. You eat your butter. You eat your eggs. You eat your real cheese. That's not Kraft Singles. It's none of that. It's real cheese. Real cheese is hard and dry. Sargento makes some real cheeses. Get you a sharp cheddar, or get you a Gouda, or get you a Havarti or whatever, and it'll be harder and it'll be drier. It won't be all nice and soft and creamy like a Kraft Single, because that's crap. That's not actual cheese. That is a cheese product. It's not cheese. Eat you some limited amounts of real cheese, maybe some heavy cream here and there. Eat mostly lean, greasy vegetables like greens, salads, broccoli, asparagus, cauliflower, limited amounts of carrots. Stay away from the potatoes. If you want to occasionally have a baked potato as a treat, maybe on Sunday have a baked potato with your steak. That would be okay, but don't be eating potatoes all the time. And you for sure are not making mashed potatoes out of them freaking bags from the center aisles. That ain't potatoes. If you're going to make a mashed potato, get you a potato and boil it and mash it yourself. And don't put a bunch of sugary milk in it. Put you just a dab of heavy whipping cream in there and some real butter, not this freaking margarine crap. Some real grass-fed butter. Kerrygold is what I recommend. And just eat those foods. There's no biscuits. You're not making biscuits. You're not making hoe cake. You're not making cakes. You're not eating toast. Those things got to go. You want a perfect breakfast that'll start your day where you feel amazing? Make your breakfast bacon and eggs with butter every day. 4, 6, 7, 8 slices of bacon. Cook them eggs in the bacon grease that comes off the bacon. Or if you don't want to do that, cook them in the butter. Make sure you drain whatever butter's left in the pan. You drain it back on top of them eggs. Salt them and pepper them up. Eat that. Breakfast of champions. Real food. And I hope that you have enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Follow us on social media. If you have followed us on Snap, where we share what we eat, I've moved that over to Instagram because Instagram has stories, which is just like Snap, and I can do everything in one place. So, Fat Guy Podcast on Instagram. Not doing Snapchat anymore. Fat Guy Podcast on Facebook and Fat Guy Podcast on Twitter. You can subscribe to the podcast if you already use the podcasting from Google or the Apple Podcast. You know how to use those. Just search for Fat Guy Podcast and you'll find us. If all that's Greek to you, you can go download the Spreaker app, Spreaker. It's a free app in your whatever place you get apps. Download it, search for Fat Guy Podcast in it, like it, hit the heart button, subscribe to it. You'll get notified about new ones, and you can go back and listen to all the old ones, all right? Thanks so much for listening. Share this. You literally could change somebody's life if you'll just hit the share button and share it on your Facebook page. 100%. Thanks again, guys. Have a good day.